Goes to the cloud now.
Yeah, so good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm supposed to, as the last time I suggested Gene Ontology as a probable template that we could learn from with regard to creating a dictionary or an ontology for transdisciplinary research, for example. And now I'm going to share some concepts and just basic, just topical overview of Gene Ontology and its concepts and some data structures that are there that we could hopefully pick some of it up and apply it to our group. So let me just put this away. So the main topics that I'd like to share is what's Gene Ontology, what's the context that it's being used in, what are the main topics or concepts that we should at least have a basic understanding of, and some of the data structures and relationships within these concepts. So, of course, Gene. Going to ontology, what ontology is, the last paper that we had defines ontology as what constitutes reality, right? By the paper by McGregor, the previous reading session. And it's one of the 4 axioms of the transdisciplinary research methodology that we discussed. But this is in terms of the philosophical definition. But as a bioinformatician and in the genomics community, it's a set of structured and controlled vocabulary for specific biological domains that can be used to describe gene products in any organism. So the gene ontology was created so that there's a uniform description or definitions of functions of genes, regardless of what organism that you're studying across biology, whether it's a virus or a plant or an animal or an extinct dinosaur that you've been able to extract DNA from and discovered some genes from. So all of us have cells. Within our cells, there's DNA. So this is an illustration of for those of you who are non-biologists, this is an illustration of how your DNA is packed inside your cell. So you have your chromosomes. I'm sure we've encountered this at least in high school. And within those chromosomes, it's a supercoiled packed string composed of DNA. And within this DNA are segments that have a distinct sequence of letters, and that's called a gene. So your gene is the defining alphabet or words or sentences that describe a particular functional unit for the cell to function, essentially. So it encodes something, and that something is protein. So this is the central dogma of molecular biology, that your genes are transcribed to messengers, and then this is by the way, messengers, this RNA, this is what the COVID vaccines, the Moderna vaccines and the Pfizer vaccines are based on. So the mRNA technology that they're saying, so this is it. And then your genes are encoded as messenger RNA, and then this RNA is the ones that are translated into protein, and the proteins are the ones that are the functional units, essentially, of your of life, essentially. But this is the central dogma way back. It's more complicated. Now we have non-coding RNAs, non-coding regions, microRNAs, and all that stuff that make it more sophisticated, more complex. But essentially, we can start from here and end up that we have proteins that are the ones that are folded up and interact with one another and control how the cell functions. So scale that up, and you have a genome, and you have lots and lots of proteins in your cell. and then you end up with structural information and functional information. So we're interested in the functional information that we can get. And then extending this up further, once you have your functional information, you can now create relationships between these functions and build pathways or reaction networks from that. So once you know the function and how different genes and different proteins interact with one another, then you have pathways and reaction networks within the cell. And of course, as we're complex systems, you can easily analogize this to whatever complex system that you can think of, whether it's a society or logistics or education or what have you. This is a sample genome workflow, genome project workflow. You start up with an organism that you're interested in, you sequence the genomes, and then do all these processes. And this small part here is what we're interested in right now. That's the topic that we're going to discuss. So in a way, this is kind of like an LLM, wherein you have just a bunch of sequences, a bunch of letters or words that you code up into an embedding, and then you try to predict what comes, not really what comes next, but what's in there, and then stop there for an LLM, and then the next steps would be what would be the meaning or the contextualization. So that's the reasoning and understanding part of an LLM that's being sort of being done right now, being the hot topics of research, so to speak. So this is the annotation part or the meaning part. So going to the Gene Ontology website, this is the Gene Ontology website. You can cook up or look up whatever gene name that you have or gene ID or a term that you'd like to research, or paste up a lot of a set of genes, gene names or IDs, and then you'll get this bunch of get back this bunch of gene ontology terms that we will discuss later. And it's kind of broken down into three main features. So it's basically the ontology itself, which is the corpus or the body of the set of definitions, the set of vocabularies that are there. So it's just the vocabularies and the relationships among the vocabularies, the terms. And then we have an annotation part wherein we have your sets of sequences here, protein coding genes that you, at this point, at this level, you just have letters or sequences that you don't know what the function of those are. And then based on some algorithms, you can map those to manually or electronically curated assignments of the functions of those genes to the assigned ontology terms. So now you have a mapping of the sequence to the terms. So now that you have your defined set of sequences, the boundaries of the phrases or sentences, if you're going to analogize the genome to a book. Now we have the mapping of those words or sentences or phrases and putting meaning or context into those words or sentences. That's essentially what the ontology is, the Gene Ontology is about. And then going further, the GeoCam or the causal activity model, it's kind of building the story within the book. So now that you have the sort of the context or the meanings of the words and sentences that you've been able to collect, what kind of story or what kind of a plot can you make from those? So that's the third part. So this is what it kind of looks like. These are, as I said, controlled vocabularies. Controlled because there's a whole team or a whole group of organizations or distributed across different research groups that curate these terms. So it's an ever-evolving body of corpus of terms that are continually being evaluated, reviewed. Some of them are retired or flagged out. Some new terms are introduced. Some are merged together. Some are split out, and so forth. So when using gene ontology, make sure, I know that we're not gonna be using this, but because it's continually evolving, we should make sure, as with any continually evolving system, that we're using the latest version of those, so that we have the most comprehensive and most updated versions. So anyway, it's a directed acyclic graph, so meaning that directed because it has an arrow going from one. So this is a graph, is a set of nodes and edges, and directed means that the edges have direction. So that's just it. And directed acyclic because the top part doesn't go back to the bottom part, so there's no cycle there. So here we have a more broad definition, like a biological process. It doesn't really mean much. In this example, it's just a biological process. So when you say it's a biological process, it could be anything. But then as you go down the levels, you have a more specific definition. So this is a biological process, the most broad term, more, and as you go down, it becomes more and more fine-grained and more specific. Like, for example, here, regulation of cell projection assembly is a biological process itself, but it can actually be associated with many other terms in the different levels of hierarchies. And it can be a many-to-many relationship wherein you have one term somewhere in the middle that wherein you have, for example, here, you have one term that you can have many parents, and one parent can have many children as well. So that kind of relationship. And the edges can have annotations or properties as to what relationship it has with other node. Like this term regulates this term, and this term is part of this term, and this term, and this, and is this term, and then this particular node is part of this other process, biological process, and so forth. So this is a screenshot from the GO documentation. So it has actually three aspects or domains: molecular function, cellular component, and biological process. So it's just a molecular function focuses on the molecules itself. The biological processes focus or defines a process or a pathway that happens, that has a beginning and an end, a process that has a beginning and an end in the cell. And a cellular component or compartmentalization means that it defines where a molecular function or a biological process happens. And if you look more closely at the data structure of the GO term, it's defined as having a name, an ID, a definition, and then some definitions also of the relationships to other terms. So mandatory elements are the accession ID, the term name, and the ontology or the aspect to where it belongs, whether it's a molecular function, a biological process, or cellular component, and the definition and relationships to other terms. So there are other properties that can be added, but at the very minimum, these five should be present. So for this molecular function, biological process, cellular components, they are not really connected to each other, but there are ways that they can be related to each other. Like, for example, as I mentioned, biological process can have an arrow to cellular component through a relationship named, for example, occurs in, something like that. Or molecular function is part of this biological process. So they are distinct, but they can be related to each other by some means. So the annotations, as I mentioned earlier, is mapping of the sequence to function. So if we imagine sequence not as a genetic sequence, but any token or any entity that we have that we can think of. So if we analogize that to a broader context, then it's like, for example, if you've heard about cognitive discourse analysis, wherein you sort of give an example, give an instruction to a student, and then the student says aloud his thoughts while he's doing the task, and then afterwards reading the transcript and then putting meaning to certain segments of those transcripts. That's mapping of your classification of the phrases that the student has in his thoughts to the kind of thinking and the thought process that the student was taking while doing the task. So we can also think of it as that. So based on experimental evidence, literature, computational processes, and others. So there are levels of evidences that can be associated with a particular term. And it can vary from very not trustworthy to an expertly curated or very trustworthy evidence or backing of a source. So here, as an example, here on the top part, this is the biological process, this is a molecular function, and this is the cellular compartmentalization. So the black text here denotes the geo terms, and then these colored text here denotes the genes. These are the names of the genes that have been assigned to a particular geoterm. So you can see that there can be many genes assigned to a particular term, and then some genes can be assigned to multiple different terms, like MC2 is assigned to many other different terms across different aspects of the gene ontology, in biological process, molecular function, and cellular compartmentalization. And that can be tied up to mean something like MCM2, the gene MCM2 is part of, or MCM2 participates in pre-replicative complex formation and maintenance in the cell, and is also and this pre-replicative complex formation is actually involved in, for example, chromatin binding. So there's this set of proteins that binds to the chromosome, and then this happens in the cytoplasm. If I think about it as a biologist, it doesn't quite make sense, but maybe it because anyway. So those are nuances, but those processes can be mapped to one or any of the three aspects of gene ontology. So if we take that further, in this example, you can, by taking another set of ontologies named relationship ontology, RO, not GO. It's another set of ontologies that curate the names of the relationships and the evidences that go into saying that this relationship exists between two different entities. So for example, this gene NED4 can be annotated separately by these different geo annotation terms. If you look at this, if you stop at just putting the geo annotations, we kind of are left with interpreting it like we did here, when we looked at this particular gene and then look at the other different gene ontology terms that have been annotated for it in the three different aspects, and try to cook it up in our head. But this, through the causal activity modeling, it's able to sort of build a story for, or build a pathway or a model that what process or what pathway this particular gene is involved in. And this is an illustration of that, where NED4 is an enabler, or it's a requirement for ubiquitin protein ligase activity, or it has protein ligase activity, this particular term, or this particular function. And this particular function also is known to be a negative inhibitor of this another activity, and so forth. And this activity has this other properties. And if you look at it at another way, so this is a molecular function that has a source and a target, and it is defined where it occurs. And this particular molecular function is part of this particular biological process that has these attributes, and this particular biological process is known to be a negative regulator of this other molecular function that also occurs in the nucleus, and so on and so forth. So that's I'll stop here. To summarize, essentially, GEO is a knowledge graph, curated and an extensive knowledge graph for genes that we can probably take some lessons from if we wish to adopt something like this. And essentially, a knowledge graph is a bunch of nodes and edges that have properties and attributes that define what they are and how they relate to each other. And as a directed graph, it can be traversed. And let me finish by asking you what you see with this. If we go back to this diagram, can you see what this diagram is? Can you see an analogy to what this is?
Those that do COT will know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is,
But,
can you give it, can you give the answer?
yeah, you go from yeah, someone wants to speak is evolution. Yeah, evolution works.
Yes, it could be evolution. But more technically, this is essentially a Hasse diagram, right? Wherein you have your base organization, and then you have your more complete organization at the top, and then you.
But this is maybe too technical. So
yes,
I think I don't know if, because I don't know if we can stay discussing, or I can show the other presentation that I have about. What do you think, Olga? Should we discuss this? Stay here, or
I think that yeah, Joe, thank you very much for the amazing presentation. I think that we can actually use it for internal seminar. So we will deep dive into genetics and we will discuss, because as far as I know, this is the so this is the causal diagrams, and they're always very interesting. We can discuss the causality between them and the direct effect and clean effect and everything. So I think this is too complex for discussion today, but we can keep the slide for the next meeting. And now maybe Thomas can present another things. This is what I would suggest.
Okay.
Can I just ask you one thing? I thought that the subject today, or the topic of the discussion today, would be like a glossary, or a table of concepts, or a conceptual framework, that kind of a thing. So if that is indeed the case, then Joe, would you be able to generalize what you just presented for us to improve our glossary skills?
Well, in the context of the Gene Ontology, as far as I know, it's been in development since 2000. So it's been developing for 25 years. So, and it's still evolving. So they started off by having experiment. They started off by realizing that their experimental data on what the functions of single genes are now accumulating, and they need a more formal infrastructure for storing all of that information. And the base of that is that they started with very strict or very formal or experimentally determined way of saying that this thing is this thing. So something like that. If you get what I mean, that it's not arbitrary that they have defined that this has this particular relationship to that. It's grounded by experimental data. So I'm not sure how easy or how hard that would be to for other fields, because at least in biology, that can be done in the lab. But for example, for sociology, it's I imagine it's kind of more difficult than a lab setting, and it's like, yeah. So I guess that's my partial answer or insights into that and how to
Well,
build a glossary or a vocabulary.
I can comment because of time, Joe. I will have to go very fast on my talk, so I will try to. I'm kind of hijacking the moment, so I can start. And do you see the screen? The presentation. So
Yes.
actually, what Joe was presenting and what's related to the glossary is that he's presenting a structure ontology. So the example of that, how that can be done, and how that produces something well curated. So it's very interesting, and I rescue that, which works for scientific fields for sure. And we can think on those lines. Maybe certain aspects that we will explore in the glossary will be able to be done to that level of precision. So actually, when that's not so easy to think of, there are the talk I'm gonna be giving quickly is a little bit about the problems actually. So that's why it's called the theories of concepts and the non-intuitiveness of their meaning, because concepts are not so intuitive in a general sense. So I will have to go really fast. We know what concepts are, but like these are a basic tool for understanding what we understand as cognition. So the cognition requires some concepts like the examples here and describe the concept of a tree, right? So there is, first of all, for those who don't know this, I will go fast. There are two ways of defining something. One, it's called the intentional definition, which is basically a conjunction of properties. We say tree is, well, properties is to be a plant that has elongated stem and has supporting branches and has leaves and so on. So these are all the arrows that Joe was describing. These are properties we can say. And if something has the properties, then it's part of the concept. When we make a glossary, we will be defining concepts. So we have to describe them maybe in terms of properties. And there is an extensional definition. So that's the other way to look at a concept. One is like kind of like the inner meaning described by the properties, and the other is the instances that are a representative of that concept. So for example, a tree will have an apple tree or a pear tree or peach tree or all sorts of trees. So instead of having a conjunction of properties, we have here a disjunction or of instances. So these are the two ways to look at this. So here the thing is this draw mistakenly, so we should have the squares surrounding each of the objects rather than, so it's a mistake. And also we know that concepts form hierarchies. Joe explained this very well, and that's how we organize let's say the plant kingdom or something like that. And these hierarchies can go from subordinate to basic to superordinate to superordinate and so on. Something really interesting here, I'm not sure if it's in the slides, is that this what is called the basic category, the basic layer. There is a basic layer in between, which is where we generally think about reality. The other are like subordinate reality, more precise, and something these other are more abstract. But interesting enough, we tend to think more at this level. We tend to speak more at this level, and we tend to, and babies turn to learn first at this level. So this level, it has something special. It's like our door to reality. And then more abstraction and more precision are kind of like secondary. So this is a 2D diagram, but maybe in 3D, we could look at this as something hanging from the basic level. Okay. So the relationships are not necessarily strict, is A, but they can also be graded, especially when something is not scientific enough, and we cannot say this is or is not, and we have to say, well, more or less, more, or more or less, but still B. So this is going further from logic, basically, and it's describe how much a cat is a pet, a fish is a pet, a dog is a pet, and then how much a tuna, guppy, or dolphin are instances of fish. Interesting enough is that when we analyze these graded relationships in concept combinations, the concept combination does not respect the graded relationship of the parts. And I won't elaborate much on this, but it's a very counterintuitive effect that concepts combined cannot be the semantic, described as membership, weights, or probability to be part of, that's not respected. Any logic, no traditional logic will describe what actually happens for concepts. This has been investigated thoroughly. Olga is an expert on this with the conjunction fallacy. We are working on that on her PhD, and it was also part of my PhD in the past. So I will now go quickly, very, very quickly on the theories of concepts. And it's interesting that this has huge implications to how we communicate, how we design, how we think, and of course in artificial intelligence as well. Who knows this? Please raise your hand if you know this description. This is a Peirce triangle for semantics or meaning. So we have a word that represents the concept. We have the actual object that we imagine, the tree in the real world, and we have the idea of it, what we understand it is. So we have to make sense of these relationships between the symbols, the actual elements of reality, and our ideas of them. That's the place we have to navigate when we represent something. What can be a model of this? So that's the question that I will try to answer. There are a few theories which relate a lot to what I just said on intentional and extensional definitions. So exemplar theory, and when I mean model, I mean a mathematical model, something that is scientifically grounded. So exemplar theory is the first theory of concepts, and is basically based on a similarity function. So we define a concept, and then we have all the instances, all the pictures, or all the elements of other symbols, and we say how much that symbol is similar to the concept. So concepts are understood as collection of similar enough exemplars, and these exemplars is, we can say, they can be genes, they can be, I don't know, words, they can be sentences or paragraphs or books or pictures or videos. We have to define, but we need this similarity function to deal with it. And generally, we go very rapidly into geometry with this type of thinking. Basically, theories of concepts are geometrical representations of their meaning. So we have the pet and the fish, let's say, and then guppy kind of, it's in the intersection. So that's why it applies to both. But basically, what I will go for the second one and then do the criticisms. Prototype theory is a different one, that instead of thinking as areas, directly similarity function, and then defining boundaries, they define a prototype, which is like the center of gravity of the concept, and everything that is around the prototype will be like part of the concept. So it defines a boundary in a different way, as a sort of radius around a prototype. So it's a little bit, it looks a little bit similar, but it's different in the spirit. Exemplar theory is a similarity within, whereas prototype theory is similarity with respect to the prototype, which might not even be a real object. And that's something very interesting about prototype theory, because when they do models, then typically the prototype it doesn't exist, but it's that ideal thing that we conceive to be the concept. So in that sense, I think prototype theory is more profound than exemplar theory. Exemplar theory is more, let's say, empirical. So that led to this idea of geometry as a foundation for meaning based on similarity or some other semantic estimations like typicality or associativeness, elicitedness. All these things have been developed by psychologists. But there are no like really solid theoretical foundations for this. So this very simple example is the distributional semantics that now like LLMs are just this thing that we call embeddings now. It's taking all the possible words, sentences, paragraphs, or whatever, and put it in a super high dimensional space, and then analyze the relationships between these things and create a smaller dimensional space representation. Let's say we start with I don't know, like 100,000 billions, and then we end up with 2 billion, and then we made a very efficient representation, and that's what LLMs are, basically, like a couple of million parameters, they say. You know, they have this number of parameters for the large language models. So this is the size of the dimension, basically. And here we got a two-dimensional representation of all these words that generally belong to a real hundreds of dimensions collapsed to 2 dimensions. And then the similarity, this is a mathematical trick that I won't explain, but then the similarity, it's more easy to capture because they keep the similarity structure in that high dimensional space, but put it back to the lowest dimensional space they can. So it's more treatable. It's easier to treat, it's easier to make calculations, it's easier to plot, and so on. It's easier to deal with geometry in smaller dimensional spaces. And that's technically is called LU decomposition. So, okay. But there is a major problem for geometrical semantic representations, which is that the semantic space is not like the Euclidean space where we operate all these embeddings. All the linear algebraic tools that we use are based on the assumption that this space will hold the properties of linear spaces, and linear spaces are Euclidean spaces that require these 3 axioms. The distance between a point and itself is 0. So there is no, everything is infinitely self-similar. The distance is also symmetric. Similarity between 2 points in a Euclidean space, it's actually not dependent on where are you looking from. And the triangular inequality, which is the most interesting, the distance between 2 points is always, the similarity between 2 concepts, let's say, is always smaller or equal than the sum of the similarities to a third concept. And it is actually equal in geometry when you go over the straight line or the geodesic. It's called the geodesic. So is it really necessary to ask now, Olga, or we can get into the end?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, because I have to make the point really fast. So this is known the triangular inequality, and there are cognitive experiments that show that this is totally violated in semantics, in human semantics. And actually, the very simple example is that you take here serial killer X and Z is spoon. Serial killer and spoon, not very associated, but then if Y is knife, serial killer and knife is very close. Knife and spoon are very close. Much closer, actually, the sum of these 2 things, their distance is smaller than the distance between serial killer and spoon. So this means that the context, which is Y, changes the semantic structure. In traditional linear space embeddings, this is not possible. There are ways to deal with it and so on. And of course, that's why large language models work. But this is not at the fundamental level. You have to trick the representations to accommodate those things. To me, this is a fundamental flaw of embeddings in general. Another major problem I already mentioned, that the combination of concepts, when you start putting concepts together, their semantic structures do not reflect the semantic structures of the parts. So there are synergies. Combining concepts create new meaning. So you cannot start with a fixed thing and expect that that will be the representation of everything, which is a big problem for the type of things we do with more scientific, like gene annotations and so on. There must be a way to deal with unexpected effects of putting two things together, because the description you made, Joe, is like, this implies that, that implies that, that implies, but what if I put these two things together? You need to create a meta level, because there might be, I don't know, like some, problems when you put these components together in a single system. So yeah, this is data. I did this in my PhD, so I tried to show this. So basically, we need new ideas. Traditional modeling of concepts is not working. We need to reconcile philosophy, linguistics, and cognition, and understand the very nature of our thoughts and emotions. It's like the big goal. And there is a quantum theoretical inspiration to think of this, which is basically that concepts can be in very different states. And when we observe them, when we think of them, they come in a particular state. So when we think of something, of a concept, normally we have one idea. We cannot have a million ideas, just one. And that idea is somehow contextual to how we thought about it. And so this is the connection to collapse. Concepts are in like potential states that collapse when we think about them. And this is what brings the connection to quantum theory, in the same way that a quantum wave, you observe it and then it collapses to a single measurement observation. So there is a metaphorical connection. And also when concepts are combined, the states are different, which is like what we see in interference and entanglement experiments, that quantum systems are also like synergetic in this sense. So that's why we can use the epistemology of quantum theory to study cognition. And that's the idea of the quantum cognition program, which I won't talk about today. To finish, I will introduce this language, which is a more abstract formalism to describe quantum systems. And it's developed by Aerts, unfortunately not here today. So basically we have the set of states, which is like the exemplars, but there could be states that do not exist in reality as well. That's very interesting. Superposition states, for example, you can have a state of be and not be. I can be Thomas and not Thomas at the same time. That's a possible state. It's not a state that exists in reality, but it's a possible state for the definition of myself. And those states are actually very useful when we analyze mathematically the situation. Then M is the set of context. So in which context something appears. L is the set of properties that are applicable to the concepts. And these are just functions that allow you to think about. So basically, these are the thinking functions. Mu and I think we missed nu as well. Mu and nu are just like how we attribute properties and how we attribute likelihood to different states. So this is a very abstract formalism to describe concepts. Yeah, this is technicalities. This is how we can think of different in different ways. So, but I won't elaborate much on that because of time. I will finish here and say this is a very interesting thing that we can explore. It's compatible to what you were describing before, Joe, but it also allows reasoning tools. So for our glossary, I would like maybe ideally to have some scope-like versions of the concepts that we can guide reasoning processes that not always are linear, in the sense that we can have triangular inequality violations, let's say. So yeah, this was my crash course on concept theory. And now, Olga, please ask your question.
Thank you, Thomas. No, you answered the question. My question was related to the LLMs models and how they build these distances on the graph, but you perfectly described it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, these embeddings still have very high dimensions because they have to accommodate for these
13,000.
effects.
For ChatGPT-3, they use 13 dimensions.
How many?
13,000 dimension. So
13,000. Ah, okay,
yeah,
that's not so
but
much. I thought
it's for
it would be much more.
GPT-3. For 4, it's much more.
Yeah. So back to the glossary, we decided like last meeting to have this exploration of different ways to annotate and organize data, because there are millions of glossaries around. So maybe an effort like Joe is proposing, and maybe on the which is compatible to what I presented here, it will be interesting to have a glossary which uses other glossaries to put them into this structure, like curate glossaries, you know. Yeah, so I think that will be a very interesting dream to dream. Is anybody following this?
Absolutely, yes.
Hmm?
Yeah. Sorry, Dirk.
So raise
right,
your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So the glossary is, of course, like an instrument for us to be able to exchange our, ideas. And I put one in my PhD thesis. In the end, I called it in the end a table of concepts, which isn't altogether. But I made a caveat, and it's a quote by from Popper. And so what he says is, I do regard them, and that is about definitions, as unimportant. I neither believe that definitions can make the meaning of our words definite, nor do I think it worth bothering about whether or not we can define a term, for we do not need undefined primitive terms in any case. Because that's about induction. I may sum up my position by saying that while theories and the problems connected with the truth are all important, words and the problems connected with their meanings are unimportant. And that, I believe, is also important for our complex science studies, because many of the things that we deal with are emergent and maybe becoming, and therefore not always exactly definable. Now, you may wonder why Popper, because he was not much involved in complex science. But another example is von Förster, who was, and he never liked very much discussions about definitions, because he says that, well, as Popper in fact says, that it's not important exactly how to define it, and to fall into that trap in that sense. So my question is, this is already a very technical solution. How does it help us to understand how how a glossary would help us to advance our studies of complex systems? Sorry about the long takeoff, by the way.
No,
I
think
can
it was.
answer.
Yeah, good.
Or Thomas, or you would like to answer?
No, go ahead, go ahead. I didn't raise my hand, sorry.
Yes, so I think that the both methods which were proposed today, it shows kind of like end product of what we could create, even if it's too global. So I personally got two ideas during presentations of Joy and Thomas. First of all, it's like ontology, and that many things can be named and defined by different words, but have the same meaning, based on the insights of based on my insights from Joe presentation. And then based on Thomas presentations, we can see graph theories and the relationship between concepts and ideas. And so practically, glossary should take into account these aspects in the way that when we will work on a definition of some concept or aspect of complex systems, we need to think about presenting it in the graph terms. We need not just give one name of one concept or theory, but we need to acknowledge and add, if we can, the synonyms, the alternative explanations and everything. And in the end, we can present our glossary in terms of graph theory as well. So this is what personally me take home, I would say, in the context of glossary based on the presentations of Joe and Thomas.
Okay.
Do you see the screen? I just reshared.
Yep.
Because I also think that we should have like educational communication and educational goals, because Simon was asking, what is this glossary for? I think it's I think we discussed this before, but the idea was to have a like a worldview, the simple worldview, easy for easier transmission, so we can communicate this worldview we have. So we have to turn it into some symbolic structure, and then we are thinking of the glossary and the challenge of accommodating all these things we know about how difficult it is to do that. So basically, the state, the context, I think this structure is very useful, because a state, for example, of a concept can be a simple paragraph. Say, this is it. It's a description, like a Wikipedia definition or dictionary definition. But if we change the context, if it's in another context, it can be a model, or it can be a situation, or it can be a poem, you know, depending on what context we are. But we are talking about a particular concept, it will manifest differently. And all those things reflect what the concept is. But depending on which context we are confronting it, we will see different manifestations of it. So I was kind of like following Joe, like what's the underlying structure of how the states could be. We could have a simple video and a text and a diagram, like, and in this way, the context could be who is the learner, who is the one that is interacting with the concept. It's me trying to, I don't know, learn something, and I come from the social sciences, or I come from philosophy or from math. So the concept has to show its face optimally, let's say, depending on who is watching or wanting to learn. So that's, I think we have a lot to do on defining the ontology, in the sense of Joe, for what constitutes a state and what constitutes a context and property. So that's my comment.
Based on this, I can make a...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, based on this, I can make a proposal to start the glossary. Okay, so based on, you know, what we discussed today, and I also would like to review the glossary about cybernetics, which was proposed by Francis in the 90s. And I also have my own glossary on complex systems, which I made by myself, so I can share it with the group. And then based on this, you know, like technical dry start, we can see how we can apply principle of ontology and graphs further. You know, we don't need like everything at once, but it was an amazing discussion, and I think we can move forward on creating really great glossary.
Yeah. So what are the action points then? You will share. Are we going to integrate different glossaries first, or because I think we can do this with LLMs, we have to try with them to automatize.
But I would make the glossary only for complex systems, concepts and definitions only. So for, I mean, like mathematical as well, right? Logarithmic map and and all this stuff. So formulas, concepts, examples in different contexts and everything. So I can propose a start because it was initially, you know, like proposed by me. So it will be, I will feel guilty from my side if I won't put enough of effort. So I can propose at least starting point, and then based on this starting point, we can elaborate all together. Or if someone has another idea,
glossary
please feel
session,
free.
you will show the initial baby glossary,
Yeah,
right?
I can. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll send you a couple of resources that I think can be helpful. Because
we
it's
can
Francis,
share it all
but,
together. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just discovered this A-Life, International Society for Artificial Life glossary.
Okay,
so
great.
It's quite
So
related
very
to what
similar.
we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Cool.
yeah, okay. So we are done. So I will stop the recording.